Kunja-bihari Jaya Gopi-jana-vallabha Girivaradari Labha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Brajajana-ranjana Yamunatira-vanachari Vanachari Jaya Radha-madhava Kunja-bihari Kunja-bihari Jaya Gopi-jana-vallabha Girivaradari Girivaradari Jashodanandana Brajajana-ranjana Brajajana-ranjana Yamunatira-vanachari Yamunatira-vanachari Jaya Radha-madhava Kunja-bihari Kunja-bihari Jaya Gopi-jana-ranjana Girivaradari Gopi-jana-ranjana Girivaradari Yashodanandana Brajajana-ranjana Yamunatira-vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada 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 Srila Prabhupada Prabhupada Nitya Gaura Haribo 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 Nitya Gaura Haribo Haribo Nitya Gaura Haribo Jaya Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Parivirajakacharya Stotra Sata His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Samved Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna, everybody. Today we have assembled here to hear from Bhagavad Gita. And today's verse is from chapter 7, entitled Knowledge of the Absolute, and text 13. It's on the board, and we are going to recite. So please repeat after me. Sādhibhūtādhidaivaṁ sādhiyajñam caye viduḥ prayāṇa-kāle pīcāmam te vidur yukta-cetasaḥ sādhibhūtādhidaivaṁ sādhiyajñam caye viduḥ prayāṇa-kāle pīcāmam te vidur yukta-cetasaḥ sādhibhūtādhidaivaṁ sādhiyajñam caye viduḥ prayāṇa-kāle pīcāmam te vidur yukta-cetasaḥ prayāṇa-kāle pīcāmam te vidur yukta-cetasaḥ sādhiyajñam caye viduḥ prayāṇa-kāle pīcāmam te vidur yukta-cetasaḥ. Anyone else? No? Okay. So we go word for word. Translation from Sanskrit to English, and please repeat after me. Sa-adhibhūta, and the governing principle of the material manifestation. Adhidaivam, governing all the demigods. Mam, me. Sādhiyajñam, and governing all sacrifices. Cha, also. Ye, those. Who. Viduḥ, no. Prayāṇa, of death. Kāle, at the time. Api, even. Cha, and. Mam, me. Te, they. Viduḥ, no. Yukta-cetasaḥ, their minds engaged in me. a translation and a purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So translation: those in full consciousness of me, of Krishna, those in full consciousness of me who know me, the Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the material manifestation, of the demigods and of all methods of sacrifice, can understand and know me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. Please repeat. Those in full consciousness of me, who know me, the Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the material manifestation, of the demigods, and of all methods of sacrifice, can understand and know me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. Okay, so here is the purport. This is the last verse of this chapter, and it has a very, very beautiful commentary, a purport. We'll go through now. So, purport. Persons acting in Krishna consciousness are never deviated from the path of entirely understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the transcendental association of Krishna consciousness, one can understand how the Supreme Lord is governing principle of the material manifestation and even of the demigods. Gradually, by such transcendental association, one becomes convinced of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and at the time of death, such a Krishna-conscious person can never forget Krishna. Naturally, he is thus promoted to the planet of the Supreme Lord, Goloka Vrindavan. This 7th chapter particularly explains how one can become a fully Krishna-conscious person. The beginning of Krishna consciousness is association of persons who are Krishna-conscious. Such association is spiritual and puts one directly in touch with the Supreme Lord. And by His grace, one can understand Krishna to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. At the same time, one can really understand the constitutional position of the living entity and how the living entity forgets Krishna and becomes entangled in material activities. By gradual development of Krishna consciousness in good association, the living entity can understand that due to the forgetfulness of Krishna, he has become conditioned by the laws of material nature. He can also understand that this human form of life is an opportunity to regain Krishna consciousness, and that it should be fully utilized to attain the causeless mercy of the Supreme Lord. Many subjects have been discussed in this chapter, like, now it's giving a list. The man in distress, the inquisitive man, the man in want of material necessities, knowledge of Brahman, knowledge of Paramatma, liberation from birth, death, and diseases, and worship of the Supreme Lord. However, he who is actually elevated in Krishna consciousness does not care for the different processes. He simply directly engages himself in activities of Krishna consciousness, and thereby factually attains his constitutional position as an eternal servitor of Lord Krishna. In such a situation, he takes pleasure in hearing and glorifying the Supreme Lord in pure devotional service. He is convinced that by his doing so, all his objectives will be fulfilled. This determined faith is called Dridha Vrata and is the beginning of Bhakti Yoga, or transcendental loving service. That is the verdict of all scriptures. This 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita is the substance of that conviction. Thus, end the Bhaktivedanta purports to the 7th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of knowledge of the Absolute. So, we'll read the verse again. Those in full consciousness of me, who know me, the Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the material manifestation of the demigods and of all methods of sacrifice, can understand and know me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. Om Ajnanatirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Staptitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Juta Pada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha kalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesh Shunyavadi Paschatya Dashitarine. So today we have a very beautiful purport, which seems to me like Srila Prabhupada has put in it a lot of his feelings and emotions. Especially as I was reading, I was noticing how it culminates at the end of this purport. In the beginning, he just writes in a, let's say, simple way, in a simple manner, that the person who is acting in Krishna consciousness persons acting in Krishna consciousness are never deviated from the path of entirely understanding Krishna. Yeah? So he was saying the one who is actually in Krishna consciousness, one who is actually acting in that way, meaning to always be conscious of Krishna, such person does not deviate. Deviate from what? From understanding Krishna entirely. Means to understand Krishna fully. So the person who acts in Krishna consciousness always understands Krishna fully. So then Prabhupada continues explaining what does it mean to understand Krishna fully. So in one way he explains here that it is to understand that Krishna is the Supreme Lord. He's the Supreme Lord of all the material manifestation. Means that all that we see around, the Supreme is Krishna. All the demigods that we see, there are so many other temples, Shiva, Durga, Ganesh, Hanuman, that Krishna is the Lord of those. And then So all other things, like here is mentioned about the sacrifice, anything, the Krishna is the Lord. So it's a person who acts in consciousness of Krishna always knows that Krishna is the Lord. And it's said that in association, when we associate with people like this, so then we actually are able to understand this fact and realize this fact that Krishna is supreme. And it said that gradually, by such transcendental association, by such spiritual association, one becomes completely convinced how Krishna is supreme. And then, at the time of death, one can remember Krishna. And then, by remembering Krishna at the time of death, it said naturally he is promoted to Goloka, Vrindavan. So here we may ask, what is the need to remember Krishna during the life? So here Prabhupada says, because if we remember Krishna during our lives, during our activities, and we dedicate our activities to Krishna, then we will remember very easily. It says very easily, yes. It says at the time of death. So why do we need to remember Krishna at the time of death? What is so important? Why it is so important at the time of death? Sorry? Yeah. So from one aspect, we need to remember Krishna at the time of death. It said here that naturally one goes to the spiritual world. And why do we need to go there? To get rid of all these miseries and suffering here in this world. The birth, death, diseases, old age, and so many other calamities. So that is one aspect. So basically, by leaving this material world, we gain a kind of a liberation from the suffering of this world. But for devotee, this liberation is not important. Devotee is completely not concerned about any kind of suffering in this world. For devotee, the only concern is how to please Krishna, that Krishna is happy, and to give pleasure of Krishna to Krishna. Thus, devotee understands that in this material world I have this body, and this body gives me so much limitations. I get tired, I need to eat, I need to pass stool in the toilet, I need to sleep, and I cannot run very fast to manage to serve Krishna immediately. When I'm sleepy, I need some time to wake up from my bed. But although I want it very quickly, but I cannot. So this body gives so much limitations, and the other people's bodies are also giving us so much trouble, and our mind. So when we are enclosed, the soul is put inside this body. It's like a prison. So how much you can give pleasure to a king being in a prison? You can give pleasure to a king when you are free from prison. So only reason why we want to get out of this world and this body is that when we are out of this body, we have our spiritual body. And in that spiritual body, Krishna will get more pleasure from us, because we can serve him very expertly, very nicely, according to his desire, and very sweetly. So that spiritual body is not just very efficient, but also very, very beautiful. Yeah? Even the most beautiful people in this world are compared to frogs when we look at the spiritual bodies. So why do we need to offer Krishna such a frog-like body? It's better to offer Krishna some beautiful body. And the most beautiful body is the spiritual body, which we already have. So in that way, when we transcend this material world and we get out of this material world by remembering Krishna at time of death, then we can be promoted to this spiritual planet of Krishna, and also naturally having our spiritual bodies for the pleasure of Krishna only. Everything we will do will be for pleasure of Krishna. our beauty, our expertise, our love, and everything. So here, it's mentioned in, Prabhupada speaks more, that this 7th chapter particularly explains how one can become a fully Krishna conscious person. Then he says the beginning of Krishna consciousness is association of persons who are Krishna conscious. Yes? So the beginning of Krishna consciousness is association of persons who are Krishna conscious. So if we want to start our Krishna consciousness, we have to find people who are Krishna conscious. And then, by such kind of association, we will also be Krishna conscious. So Krishna consciousness depends on sound vibration. We can say briefly like this. So we can say, how much degree of transcendental or Krishna's sound vibration we are in our life, this much Krishna conscious we are. And how much there is a mundane sound vibration, that much of mundanity in our lives we have. And in that way, we need to seek persons who have 100% Krishna sound vibration in their lives, and then take association of these type of personalities. And then we will become Krishna conscious ourselves. It said, such association is spiritual and puts one directly in touch with Supreme Lord. And by His grace, by Krishna's grace, one can understand Krishna to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here we can see that the best way how to understand Krishna is to associate with Krishna conscious persons. Yeah? At the same time, Prabhupada says, one can really understand the constitutional position of the living entity. Yeah. So then, in such association, we will not just understand that Krishna is God, that Krishna is the Supreme, but we will understand the position of all living entities. And what is actual position of all living entities? That everybody is a soul. Everybody is a spiritual being, a soul. And this body is just a covering, like a coat. Like now is winter time, and we're starting to wear some jumpers and jackets and shawls. So these shawls are not us. These are just covering our bodies. So the same, this body is not us. The body is a coverage of the soul. And the mind is also not us. Mind means what? I think, I feel, I want. That is mind. But real soul is not that mind, and a soul is not this body. The soul is the one which is searching for Krishna and loves Krishna. So in that kind of association, we will really understand this position of every living entity, how living entity is a soul, and in this material world, this soul has forgotten about Krishna. Because soul has come in touch with all these material elements, the body, the mind, and everything else, and these material elements cover the consciousness of the soul, and that is called Maya, illusion. And because of this forgetfulness of Krishna, the soul has started to identify with the body and thinks that I am this body, that this is me, and whatever is related to my body, it's mine. My daughter, my son, my husband, my friends, my colleagues in the work, this is somehow related with me. And we start to enter into that kind of a scene and a drama, but it's actually illusion. It's nothing like this. It's nothing to do with us. Our real business is in a spiritual world to be with Krishna and also interact with His associates and become one of His associates, be one of His associates. So like that, but due to this material identification, we are also subjecting ourselves to these laws of material nature, and we are entangling ourselves in this material nature. So it's very difficult maybe in the beginning immediately just to say, oh yeah, okay, understood, I'm not this body, I'm soul, so it's fine now with me. Because this attachment, this connection with this matter, with this material energy has been there for so long from our point of view, not from Krishna's point of view. From our point of view, it has been there for so long that it's for lifetimes and lifetimes. We die, we take birth again, we die, we take birth again, and all these births, millions and millions of births, we've been thinking that we are this body, that our relatives are our relatives, our friends are our friends, someone I like, someone I don't like, and if someone doesn't like me, it hurts so much, and if someone likes me, it is so pleasing. And then we live and we feed ourselves with this someone liking, someone disliking. So it's very difficult to get out of it just like this by like a decision. Okay, I decided now no more. We can decide this, but to really make it work, we have to apply ourselves to the process of bhakti. Yeah? We have to engage in bhakti. So this bhakti will purify our heart and purify our consciousness. And in this purified heart, it's like a mirror. It's full of dust. So by bhakti process, by chanting of Hare Krishna mantra, we clean this mirror. We clean this mirror. And once the mirror is clean, we can see our real face. And this real face will not be the face that we see in a dirty mirror, here with this nose and some kind of wrinkles or skin. That face will be made of Sat-Chit Ananda, of the knowledge, of the wisdom or cognizance from the bliss and from eternity. So that's where our real face and our real body, our clothes will be made from Sat-Chit Ananda, wisdom, eternity and bliss. Our jewelry will be made from that. Our hair will be made from that. Not from these elements like here, earth, fire, water, ether, and what else was there? Air. These elements hurt. Yeah? It's a burden. But these spiritual elements, it is something very, very natural. So these kind of realizations, a soul and a living entity will get in an association of Krishna consciousness. So it won't be just theory anymore. It will be actually a realization. And then Prabhupada says that in such kind of association, besides all these wonderful realizations, person will also understand that especially in this human form of life, there is a possibility to attain this supreme goal, to actually meet Krishna face to face. Yeah? There are so many species of life. There are birds, there are flowers. How much flower can engage in chanting of the holy name of the Lord? The dog, how the dog can chant the holy name of the Lord? How much dog can understand? The bird, the squirrel, the cockroach, the ant, the elephant, the monkey. How much deep they can go in the spiritual knowledge. Although they are the same jivas, the same souls, but how much they can understand. But it is only the privilege of human. When the soul enters the human body, that's the opportunity to understand these deeper subject matters. So now suddenly we got in this body. After so many births rotating in this samsara, having different types of bodies, finally somehow or other we attained this human life. And it is just for less than 100 years. Very little time. And many of us here already passed half of that life. So we have a very, very little time to understand. So why to waste time? So let's get together in a good Krishna conscious association and and seek that association and try to cultivate these realizations, what Prabhupada mentions here. Yeah, it said that the human form, the human life should be fully utilized to attain the causeless mercy of the Supreme Lord. Then Prabhupada again comes to describe this chapter. He says, many subjects have been discussed in this chapter. Yeah, we know in a verse which was here. (24). No, not 24. Anyway, I forgot. Yeah, so Prabhupada says there is a discussion of in this chapter has been discussed the men in distress, the men who are inquisitive, the men who want material necessities, and so many things they want. But then he says, but actually, the one who is elevated to Krishna consciousness does not care for any other processes, any other things. So what does he care for? He simply directly engages himself in activities of Krishna consciousness and thereby factually attains his constitutional position as eternal servitor of Krishna. So the Krishna conscious man, the Krishna conscious person who has understood or realized all that we discussed before, what does he do? He doesn't care about other things. He only wants to hear about Krishna and glorify Krishna. That's what Prabhupada says. This is what Krishna conscious man directly. He wants to engage directly in the activities of Krishna conscious, means in devotional service. And he wants to glorify Krishna, thus becoming eternal servitor of Lord. He takes pleasure in hearing and glorifying the Supreme Lord in pure devotional service. So if I do only these things, only I glorify Krishna, I only do devotional service, what's going to happen with the rest of my life? What's going to happen with me? Yeah? With my things? So here, Srila Prabhupada said, such kind of person is convinced that just by doing these Krishna's activities, Krishna conscious activities, just by chanting the holy name and glorifying Krishna, everything else will be taken care of. And then he says, that's how Bhakti Yoga begins. So once we don't have that realization, it's not Bhakti Yoga, Prabhupada said. So Bhakti Yoga begins only from that point when we say that I'm not interested in any other activities. I only want to directly glorify the Lord. That's what he says. And everything else will be taken care of. So that Prabhupada says, this when Bhakti Yoga begins. And this kind of determination is called Dridha Vrata. Dridha Vrata. Yeah? There are the verse where Krishna says that my pure devotees engaged in glorifying me with strong conviction. Yes. And they don't think, oh, just because I'm sitting here and glorifying Krishna, what's going to happen to my house, what's going to happen to this, what's going to happen to this. They only want to glorify Krishna, and they know that what's going to happen, this is supposed to happen. My only business, my only duty, not just business, my nature is to glorify Krishna. It is not so much a, duty, but it's more than duty. It's more than just a lifestyle. It's more than just obligation. It is my nature. The natural position of soul is to engage in glorification and the service of Krishna. And this is what I want to do. And whatever happens to all this material world, let it happen. Yeah. And it's not irresponsibility, it's not an escapism. It is intelligence. It is a deep realization that has come in the heart of a fortunate person. And this person has given himself to that realization. And how and why? Because this realization is so strong and so convincing that nothing else a person can be doing, cannot resist, but just go and do bhakti yoga. It said that is the verdict of all the scriptures. And this 7th chapter is a substance of that conviction. Yeah. So it's like this 7th chapter, it's like a substance of that conviction that there is nothing else for me to do but engage in bhakti yoga. Like this. So here I wanted to read from my book, if anyone still doesn't know. It's a chapter called Serious. This book is available in our shops here and also with me. But let's read. Basically it's a collection of Srila Prabhupada's statements about pure devotional service, spontaneous devotional service. So this series, let me see, is that the one? No, pure devotional service, that's what I wanted to read. The chapter Pure Devotional Service. The series is also there, but pure devotional service. Yeah? Because one thing we have to also understand that like there is a verse in the Bhagavatam, yeah? When we read, we know, it says, the same like by eating, we feel ourselves full. Nobody has to tell me, okay, now you are already eaten, you don't need to eat. Only I myself feel. And simultaneously with this eating, we also feel pleasure, we feel satisfied, we feel pleasure, and also the third thing is that we don't want anymore. So the same with this bhakti yoga is that when we start practicing, we feel pleasure. And also we feel some satisfaction in the heart. And the advancement of that Krishna consciousness is measured that we are becoming disinterested in this world, in these material things. So these are the inner feelings. So that's why here in this pure devotional service, it will also be mentioned that bhakti yoga gives naturally detachment from this body and this world. And why it is necessary, it's written like it's a sub-product. This detachment and is a sub-product of bhakti. It's like a son of bhakti, yeah? Vairagya. So that kind of vairagya, this detachment, is naturally fitting together with bhakti because it's a transformation. When you come from lower, from the matter, when you attain something higher, the spirit. Yeah? So Prabhupada writes, the spiritual soul has spiritual activities and spiritual desires. Unalloyed devotion to the service of the Lord is the only spiritual desire. Yeah? So the meaning that the only desire of the soul is to serve Krishna. Every other desire is material. To fulfill this spiritual desire, however, one must be free from all material desires. So if we want to fulfill our only one desire, what is there belonging to us, we have to free ourselves from material desires. Because these material desires will take the place in our consciousness and will not allow us to be satisfied, will not allow us to satisfy our only desire, our only hankering, which is Krishna. As soon as one has material desires, one loses his spiritual identity. Yeah? It's serious. As soon as one has material desires, one loses one's spiritual identity. Then all the paraphernalia of one's life, including one's senses, body, religion, patience, and intelligence, are deviated from one's original Krishna consciousness. As soon as one has material desires, one cannot properly use his senses, intelligence, mind, and so on for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is why we have to have desire to be free from this material world and go to spiritual world. Because in this material world, there is a very good place to cultivate these material desires. But as long as we have these material desires, we cannot give full satisfaction to Krishna. But if the soul's only objective and the nature is to satisfy Krishna, then that also souls from opposite way, nature is to not have these material desires, because then Krishna cannot be satisfied. Thus, if we wish to please the Lord, we must free ourselves from the network of material desires. Our only anxiety should be how to please Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada says, unless we are free from material desire, we cannot be attracted by Krishna. So the less material desires we have, the attraction to Krishna becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So sacrificing one's material enjoyment, it's not a punishment. It is actually a reward. It's like a gift, because the sacrificing of material enjoyment gives pleasure to Krishna and increases increases our desire to serve him more. So Prabhupada writes in Srimad Bhagavatam, he says, devotees sacrifice all personal interests to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, and similarly the Lord, although having no personal interest, can do anything for the interests of his devotees. One who is full in himself has no personal interests. In pure devotional service, the only motive should be to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is not actually a motive. That is a pure condition of living entity. So this is a very important. Srila Prabhupada's first he writes, in pure devotional service, the only motive should be to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But he said, but that is actually not the motive. To please the Lord is not the motive. To please the Lord is pure condition of the soul. This is our way of life. This is us. This is our nature, to please the Lord. This is not the motivation. So that's why whenever we do something for pleasure of the Lord, this is not a motivation. This is natural. This is unmotivated. Pure devotees are not desirous of any material enjoyment, nor are they averse to it. They completely dovetail their desires with the desires of the Lord and perform nothing on their personal account. So here we come to that aspect to understand that what does it mean to enjoy in this material world? There isn't. Or what does it mean to give up? If everything belongs to Krishna, everything belongs to God, nothing is ours. So if we enjoy somebody else's property, it's called the thief. If we enjoy God's property, we are thieves. And if we renounce God's property, we are fools, because it's not ours. How can you give up something that you don't have? Like, I give up this camera. I give it up. So it's a foolish statement because this camera has never been mine. I don't possess it, so how can I give it up? But if I now suddenly take it and I enjoy, use it for me, it's a thief. So the same way, everything in this world belongs to Krishna. So neither it is for us to enjoy, nor it is for us to give up. All we can do, we can take anything in this material world and we can use it for Krishna's pleasure, for the service of Krishna. And if we have that desire, if we comply with our nature of serving Krishna, then Krishna from heart will give that understanding how I can use something for Krishna. And naturally we'll be detached from using it for ourselves. Prabhupada writes also, in a material world, nothing should be accepted for one's sense gratification. Everything should be accepted for the service of the Lord. This is the mentality of the spiritual world. So once we have this mentality that whatever I see, whatever comes on my way, I use for Krishna, that is spiritual world. That's how everything becomes spiritual world. Because that is the mentality of the spiritual world. And serving Krishna, this is our real independence. And if we want anything else, it is a sign of our misfortune. This is all Srila Prabhupada's statements. The Lord can be known only by the sincere mood of eagerness for service, and not by any amount of material qualification. So like that, there are unlimited nectarian passages and statements of Srila Prabhupada's books. We read them and we get more and more enlightened and realized. So please read Srila Prabhupada's books. And here in this one I have selected some of the Srila Prabhupada statements for special inspiration, if you wish that also. But specifically this Bhagavad Gita is very wonderful piece of literature because it is spoken by Krishna directly. And a pure devotee like Prabhupada has brought out and churned this nectar and given it to us in this form. Like this purport itself, it's like, when I was reading it, I felt it's like Prabhupada starts speaking and speaking and speaking, and then these emotions and feelings get more and more awakened. And it's almost like, at the end of the purport, it's almost like an ecstasy there. He starts simply about, yes, it's Krishna is a Supreme Lord, he's a master of the demigods, he's Supreme Personality. If you remember him, at time of death, you go to Goloka Vrindavan, and then he goes more and more, and he says that in a wonderful association, we can become Krishna conscious, and we can understand how forgetful we are, and then in this human life, we can actually regain our Krishna consciousness. And then he says, and such kind of pure devotee does not care about anything else. There is no deviation whatsoever. And he is fully engaged in pure devotional service. And he is convinced that by doing so, everything else will be taken care of. And all he wants, there is nothing else what he wants to do is only be engaged directly in hearing and glorifying the Lord. And this is the beginning of Bhakti Yoga, the transcendental loving service. So he ends this purport with such a wonderful, ecstatic words. So Bhagavad Gita is full of nectar. We need to have a heart to feel it. We need to have eyes to see it. We need to have ears to hear it. And even if we do not hear, do not feel, and do not understand, we still continue hearing it, because by the mercy of the Lord, because in a wonderful association of Krishna conscious persons, and because by this power of Bhagavad Gita, our consciousness, the mirror of heart will be cleansed, and finally we will see how much rasa, how much juice of that sweet nectar is in this wonderful purports of our Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Radha Shyam Sundar ki jai. So if anybody has some corrections or comments or anything to say, we have 2 minutes. If not, then we can end here. Thank you. Hare Krishna.